Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Stadnick. I am a family resource specialist here at the PEAL Center. I am a white female wearing glasses and an extra short haircut. We are the PEAL Center. We are the Parent and Training and Information Center for the state of Pennsylvania. We are federally funded through the Office of Special Education Programs to help families navigate the special education system. And today we're going to be talking about communicating effectively with your school team. We're going to try to hold all of our questions till the end. You'll see that we are recording. We just hold the questions until the end. So if there's any personal identifiable information, it's not being recorded. And also remember, if you don't want any personal information out there, this is recorded and will be and could be public later on. The chat will not be public or shared, however. So I'm excited to talk to you about communicating with your school team. This is the key component to working collaboratively with your team. So you're going to hopefully identify with some of the things we see in here, get some good information. There'll be some resources at the end. Again, thank you for joining us, and I will get started. Okay. So this is all of us, right? Even if you have a child, your child necessarily doesn't have to have an IEP. This could work with children with 504 plans, or maybe a child has neither and you just need to have a conversation with your school. And so let's just take a look at what this is not an uncommon scenario that we hear about. I think that we can all, even if our child has an IEP or a 504, it's probably not the first time we've gotten a call like this from the school. And, perhaps we can empathize with her, right? This is Janelle and her son, Jackson. She's getting a call from the school. When you get a call from the school, it makes you feel some sort of way, right? We're talking Janelle feels anxious and she's a little bit angry, right? And about this, it's not the first time this call has happened, not the first time to request for a meeting. And it also seems like the school may not be following his IEP. And so what do you think, and you can add this to the chat, what questions, right, might you ask Janelle? What do you think during the meeting would be some key points that she needs to address with the district? Who do you think should be at her meeting? Who would you ask to come to a meeting if they called about a behavior for a child? What would be your tips for walking into this meeting? She was already feeling frustrated and a little bit angry. What do you think she would hope to achieve, or what would be a good outcome to this meeting? And again, what might she do in advance to prepare for this meeting? And that's really what we're going to get to the gist of. We're going to talk about a couple of resources that are on the PEAL Center website. This one in particular would be a communication tips brochure that we have on our website. So that link will be in the chat. You can follow along there. If you miss it, it will be at the end of this resource also. Okay, so let's talk about some of these strategies for successful communication. Let's think about some of the important things to keep in mind when communicating with your school. be it an IEP meeting, a discussion with the school nurse, an email to the teacher or principal because of any problem. Again, many of these essentials are reviewed in the communication tips handout. Um, and also Lisa Leitner's website, A Day in Our Shoes. You'll find those resources as well, again, in the chat or at the end of the PowerPoint. Okay, first and foremost, be prepared, be informed, go in knowing you're right. And just, you don't have to know everything all in the beginning. We know what we know, right? Going in. One of the two key things that we want to know about, though, is just the basics. Your free and appropriate education and least restrictive environment. It will put you in a stronger position to have a good conversation with your team. The more you know, the better creative conversations that you can have during team meetings. Knowledge is always power. When people realize that you know what you're talking about, they're more apt to listen to you. There's lots of ways to increase your knowledge. Your intermediate units have trainings that you can take. Most of them now are on Zoom or webinar. There are conferences that you can go to. Many of them have scholarships for parents. The PEAL Center, on the PEAL Center website, we have resources that include IEPs 101, and we also have an online self-paced advocacy academy, and we can drop that link also into the chat, or again, it will be on the end of the resource slide. If English is not your first language and you need interpretation, please let the school know in advance that they can make the needed arrangements. And also, if you have a disability or need an accommodation, also inform the school in advance of that. One of the things that we often miss is our school policies on important issues that affect our children. Always ask for the student handbook. We often work with families that don't understand that the school handbook applies to your student with a disability the same as it does other students in the school district. So please ask for the student handbook, and then ask the school, right, the context of the student handbook. If you have questions about how your child will abide by the student handbook, ask the school. And if something needs to be written into the IEP, you can make adjustments for some of these school policies, or how, if we need support, if the child needs support in adhering to the school policies, it could also be written into the IEP. But always read the school handbook, especially around behavior and discipline and suspension, or in school suspension or out of school suspension. One of the big things is looking at how you as a family like to be communicated. So be clear how you want to be communicated with, either that's via email, paper, sit with your child in his backpack, or mail. Obviously the mail we've had has been quite slow lately. So always tell, how do you want to be communicated with? What is the best way to reach you and get those documents to you? And then ask that communication method be documented. You want it documented that this is how you want your communication. If it's important communication, sometimes that stuff gets lost. Maybe it's, especially if it's sent via email, in your spam or junk mail, ask that there be a follow-up, right? Ask that there be a follow-up. If it was important information that you needed to know, have somebody follow up, make sure they're following up. Um, Also know that school districts are often inundated with email and notes. So determine who you should be communicating with and for what, right? What should be communicated between you and the teacher or the case manager, the principal, special education administrator? When does the whole team need to be included? These are all things that you can discuss around communication and document. Follow up all interactions in writing. Documenting can eliminate confusion and provide clarity, reduce the likelihood of errors, and provide common framework of understanding on what is discussed. It's often that sometimes we forget about things that were discussed at the beginning of the meeting, especially if the meeting has gone on for a considerable amount of time. It's also a way to share your perception of the conversation, and it allows the reader an opportunity to correct any misunderstandings. So, you know, I could have said something in the meeting and the other person did not hear or convey it correctly. So if you rewrite it and they were like, oh, I didn't think that's what they mean, that can help us communicate effectively. It can also serve as proof, if you will, of decisions or commitments and helps us when we tend to forget, right? So we can adhere to the things that we say in our IEP meeting. So we can adhere to the things that we said we were going to do. So there can be some follow through. It can be pulled out and fact checked, and if necessary, can serve as evidence when need be. One of the big things on communication, again, is to focus on your child, right? Keep the focus of the conversation on your child and his needs in the context of the IEP. Let's think about Janelle and Jackson. Given this first point, would she be better to say, and it's going to be one or two, and you can pop them in the chat. Number one would be Jackson has a difficult time transitioning from activity to activity, and warning him in advance and using his visuals should reduce the problems. How can we sharpen that up a bit or make it better? Or should she say, I know you're in a hurry to get to the next activity, but you just can't rush him or he will react like this. So remember, we're looking to try to keep the context of what he needs based on his IEP. So again, Janelle and Jackson, given the second one, the second bullet point, what would be the better approach, one or two? Well, you didn't give him warning, and you know he loves his tablet. His reaction should not be surprising to you. Or two, I can only imagine the challenge of getting 27 children to move from their tablets to anything that isn't preferred. But I'm convinced that if you gave him the 5, 3, and 1 minute warning consistently, that he will soon understand. I wonder if a visual timer would help. Again, these are, if you look at it, it's number two is really problem solving what happened. And the last bullet, might Janelle be better saying, I'm sorry, but I don't know why you brought me in here when you clearly didn't follow the IEP. Or number two, I believe Jackson's IEP has a solid behavior support plan to prevent these types of situations. What do you think went wrong? Do you think the plan has to change, or do you think it was just a hiccup? So if you look at those, it really turns it into a positive spin and supports what is in the child's IEP and surrounds the conversation on what is written in the IEP and how to support on how to support your child per his plan, right? That because that IEP is your child's blueprint, and that's what we want to make sure that's being followed. Okay. Again, back to some more communication. Let me go back, sorry. It says, who should you email? What is the chain of command? And it could depend on the type of issue that's happening. If your situation is like Janelle's and there's an issue with something in the IEP or perhaps a 504, it's not being followed, where would you start? Um, you might just start simply with the teacher, reminding them that Jackson has a positive behavior support plan. It feels like something was missed. You could ask them to review to avoid the problem to reoccur. If it reoccurs, you could then go to the case manager. Right? You might go to the case manager, explain that something is not being implemented, and ask them to remind the staff to be consistent. Right? So the case manager would help support if the student had an aide or a paraprofessional, and can also sit down with the teacher and go over the IEP or the positive behavior support plan and make sure that there were no questions. If your child has a 504 or a case manager is not responsive, you may reach out to the principal, special education administrator, or the 504 officer. And sometimes we don't hear back. So if you don't hear back, what next steps might you take? Like if I don't hear back from somebody, I'm probably going to try again up the chain of command. And then I have to think about a timely response, right? Teachers are busy across the day. Responding to emails probably is not something they're expected to do outside of their contracted hours. And again, what is the district's policy about responding to emails? And that would be a question I would ask at the IEP meeting. If I send you an email, what is the expected response time? Because you don't want to be inundating them with emails, but you also want to be communicated with. So families all look very different. So generally, both parents have the right to make educational decisions, be informed and invited to meetings. So make sure that the school also knows who they can reach out to. Okay. When conflict does arise, right? Don't panic. Conflict happens. We can't be expected to agree on everything all of the time. So conflict is inevitable. For many parents, school meetings can be intimidating, nerve-wracking, frustrating, even traumatic at times, right? While it's easy for us to say, stay calm, how do we do so is the issue. And we're going to talk about that. Watch your nonverbal language. Remember the 7-38-55 rule, right? 7% of our communication is language. Tone and voice are 38%, and body language and facial expression make up another 55%. So watch your nonverbal language. It never hurts to state your disagreement, right? Again, conflict can lead to some good problem solving. Ask about other options if you disagree. A good example, look, I don't believe that this is going to work for Jackson. What else can we try? Is there anyone else who can help us come up with some other ideas? Maybe that person is not on the team yet. If a child has a behavior, do we need a behavior specialist? How can we pull that person in? But when conflicts arise, again, just we say stay calm. We often just kind of let ourselves get upset, and sometimes we unknowingly close doors that might have been able to get us our child's needs met in school. Know those triggers for yourself. We're going to kind of cover some information from the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. Again, another acronym for us to know is CADRE. This resource, again, will be at the end, and we may be able to pop it in the chat. We're going to go back to what CADRE says is to check yourself, right? Remain mindful of your emotional state. We often remind our kids of this. Sometimes we also need to be reminded. It's harder to stick to the facts when you're in your fight or flight mode. Um, if you know your common reactions in advance, consider how you can derail a reaction that should occur. And it's okay. You have an emotional connection to your child that the school doesn't have. Um, recognize when you're coming to the end of your rope before you react. And it's okay to take a break. It's okay to step back. It's okay to state what your interest is for your child and try another approach. Sometimes you got to agree to disagree and move on. And it is okay to reconvene the meeting. If you are in an emotional state that you are in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, it is okay to say, I'd like to reconvene this meeting at another date, right? Give yourself some time to regroup and recoup. And if you feel that maybe you needed a supported person, reach out to that person. Because, nobody on the team, nobody in that meeting woke up and said, I want this to be like a miserable meeting, right? So if you're feeling that way, there's probably other people in the meeting also feeling that way. It's okay to take a break. I need a 5-minute break. We'll come back and we can start again. Make a list, right? Plan ahead. If you've got a lot of concerns, make that list before the meeting. It helps a couple of things. It helps you to remember what you wanted to address and not get derailed like during the meeting, especially if it's kind of long. It also helps you prioritize and it gives you a place to jot down some of the responses, right? So when you write down the list, I often leave space to talk about the ask, what I'm asking for, and then beside of it, what the school proposes for each of your concerns, what it would look like, and when and how it will be implemented. If your child has an IEP, then you can ask this list to be included under the parental concerns section in the IEP, right? So this helps you keep them ordered and keep them prioritized and also can be added to your child's IEP. Listen carefully, right? If you don't understand something, ask, let them know. It's okay to not understand. These processes are confusing for most people. Complete with a whole list of acronyms, and we've said several here. Um, and your open-ended questions can be helpful. What would that look like? When would be doing that, right? So if there's something you don't understand, right? Am I hearing you say, repeat their question back to them? If there's an acronym, can you explain that acronym to me? Can you give me some examples of how that's going to work? Again, if English is not your primary language, it is your right to ask for an interpreter so you can fully understand what's being said. Again, always reiterate, did I hear this or I don't understand this? These are all okay things to say. It's supposed to be a learning process for everyone. And then on the other end of that, make sure you're being understood, right? If somebody seems puzzled, say, oh, I think I confused you. Do you need me to say that in a different way? Or you look as if I confused you. Can you share with me what you're understanding or what you think I'm trying to get across? Again, just make sure you're understood. You can look across the room. Remember, those nonverbal cues happen for everyone, right? If somebody looks like they may not understand, ask, do you understand what I mean? Can I explain it differently? Keep options in mind as you go into the meeting, right? There could be things that you haven't thought about. There might be new ideas out there. sometimes somebody comes up with an idea and let's try it, right? Let's try it for 8 weeks. Let's collect some data because data is really important in the options for the child's IEP. Again, go back, keep the focus on your child, um, what supports him in his IEP. You know, we just haven't seen progress. Um, what options can we consider? If you haven't been given an agenda, you can create one of your own, right? This can help you stick to the important topics and cover the things that you planned. You can ask them to come up with the district to come up with an agenda again, or you can make your own. Um, if you think that there could be something else or something unsaid, be sure to ask. Is there anything else that we should be considering? Um, ask for the data. Data should drive all of our decisions in an IEP, right? If something isn't working in the student's IEP, then there should be data based on that, right? What's working, what's not working. There should be data surrounding that, and that should drive our decisions on what we should be trying or not trying. There's a resource from Patton. It's called Framework for Access and Belonging. That might be helpful to consider new ideas. Again, we can drop that resource at the end. Acknowledge the barriers that are happening, right? We all know that that teaching isn't easy. We always, offer to do your part to support your child's learning. It is a great partnership plan. Be sure to follow through. Explain, right, that your job is to make sure your child thrives in school and is to be successful, right, along with his peers. We often say that the district has a 1-year plan. We as parents have a 5-year plan, right? So it's our job to explain our vision to the school, right? And then offer to take care of the pieces that you actually have control over. Like, and say your child had a difficult night, drop a note to the teacher. He had a difficult night. He may need some extra time here. He may need a break. But write that note to the teacher. Let them know. If there are medication changes or if something happened, drop that note to the teacher. That's something that you control, right? And don't give up, right? You may agree on the issue, but not how to address it. That's the important part of being an integral part of your IEP team, right? Is that you get to brainstorm all the options. It's the reason we have a team. You are always the constant in your child's life, so again, that 5-year plan, we are in this for the long haul, and we see the IEP as a long-term process, and you don't have to solve everything at once. Remember, your IEP is a fluid document. It should change and grow with your child, right? And that's what some of these, like, brainstorming options, and discuss them in a problem solving way. You may need to ask again why some options aren't being offered and ask them to explain. Again, we're not afraid of conflict, right? It happens. We've got to ask the questions if we don't understand, right? We want to be informed decision makers in our child's IEP. Explain to me. You know, he needs maybe extra speech or more speech. Can we come up with some good ideas about how to make it happen? Um, you know, there are lots of examples on brainstorming and connecting with your team, which is really important that we're able to discuss and address these things even when we're having conflict. And then think about your personal barriers. And we can, if you go into a meeting, you think about what your personal barriers are. What makes you frustrated? Are there key words that do that? It really was Janelle's experience in the beginning similar to something that has happened to you. Um, if you've ever used or if you found you have a good communication strategy that you use, you can pop that in the chat. If you want to talk about personal barriers, again, the chat's private. It's not going to be shared in the recording. You can talk about those in the chat. I have a personal barrier. I always get frustrated when I hear the term, "Oh, we don't do that here." So that's kind of a trigger for me. So I know that that kind of language is a barrier for me. So I try really hard to ask how we can, if we don't do it that way, what are some ways that we can meet the need of the student at that time? And so we're going to stop the recording. This is our evaluation.